Right, guys, as we saw last time how we conditionally render our block on the screen if there exists a block. So if there is no block, this part will not render. But what if this data fetching is taking quite some time? We don't want to leave our users dumbfounded on the screen and just looking. It's not a good user experience. So what we can do is we create a new state that will hold a kind of variable called loading or something. So we do cons and we call this loading, and as you know, set loading. So it's equals to use state okay, and we set the value to true. Initially it is true. Loading is true initially. So how do we want this to work? We want our users to see loading. We want our users to see loading if there is no block. But as soon as we get a block, we want them to see the block so that they have something to look up to, you know. It's a good user experience. So we use our conditional ranging again. So if loading is true, which we have set there to true, if loading is true, so what do? We make a div and we close the div. Inside this div, so we can have here data loading. So at least the user knows that something is happening. So the user is expecting. So let's check this out and see if it works successfully. Okay, we have it, data loading, you see, because it is true. But we don't want our users to have the data and then they are still seeing this data loading. So what we can do is, as soon as we get our data here and we set it to the data, what should happen is we should set this value, set loading to false. And when we set it to false, we are not going to see it here because here loading is going to be false. So this piece of code is not going to run. Then we are going to have a block available here. So as such, this part of the code will run successfully. So let's look at that now. You see? Look, are you seeing? You have to look keenly, then you will see loading, and then we get our data, then loading goes away. Look at it again, keenly. Within a split of a second, it comes and it goes. But now let's make it a little bit realistic by using set timeout. So, you know, when we are using use effect, this data is going to be in a server somewhere, and it's not going to be that fast to get our data. So it's going to take some time before we get that data. So before we do that, why don't we put this in, let's put this in a set time block. Set time out, kind of function that would delay, is going to delay our loading a bit while we do our thing, while we see this loading. So we put our function inside here, and then we set this time out. Is this time I will run this function if it will run this function after 1000 milliseconds. So after 1 second, it's just going to delay this fetch. We are just trying to depict the same scenario that happens with a server outside that is somewhere and you have to wait for a while before the data comes back. So this set timeout is going to delay this fetch request for like 1 second before we get our data. So in the course of delaying, we'll be able to see this data loading well on the screen. Let's see this. Let's refresh. You see, it takes more time. Let's increase that time to 5 seconds. 5,000 milliseconds. And then we'll run this. Look at the time that it takes to get you your data. So guys, that is how it is. So we are going to look in our next video how to catch errors.